Hello everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Cut Content Files. Today I'll be discussing the development of Counter-Strike and what was cut from the game while it made its transition onto Steam and eventually the Source engine. Every gamer knows about Counter-Strike, and I really shouldn't have to explain it, but here's a basic summary of it. Counter-Strike is a multiplayer Valve game which centers on the conflict between terrorists and counter-terrorists. It started out as a mod developed by college students Jess Cliff and Min Lee. By the fifth beta of the mod, Valve Software started actively participating in development and ultimately bought the rights to the game and offered the original developers jobs at the company, which both of them accepted. Anyways, a lot of the ideas and content that was present or planned during the beta stage were eventually scrapped, and I'll be talking about them today, as well as content that was cut from the Rogue Entertainment and Gearbox Software's respective versions of Counter-Strike Condition Zero. I want to give a special thanks to the YouTuber ESCalation, as his series The Cut Content of Counter-Strike heavily inspired this video. If you like this type of video, his channel will be in the cards, as he has a crazy amount of videos on cut content from Counter-Strike. I also used a lot of his footage from those videos, so please go to his channel, check him out if you haven't already. Yeah, that's right, a suicide belt weapon was actually planned for Counter-Strike. Obviously, it'd be used by the terrorist side. In an interview, Randy Greaseball Pitchford, the lead developer for Gearbox at the time, said they removed the suicide belt from the multiplayer after it became obvious that players would just blow themselves up in the spawn to troll their teammates. And it makes sense, as there's just no way that something like this could go well, especially with the Counter-Strike community.
You piece of shit, Rush! Why are you fucking still on A so slow? Mid! Holy shit, you suck!
Who uses AUG?
You fucking retarded piece of shit looking moron motherfucker.
The suicide belt just wouldn't go well with the current game flow established in Counter-Strike, but it would be interesting in custom servers, maybe like the zombie survival game mode but with kamikaze zombies. The only remaining version of this weapon is used by NPCs in Counter-Strike Condition Zero deleted scenes, with them activating it and killing themselves via explosion. Back when Counter-Strike was just a mod in its beta, the M4A1 did not look like its final CS 1.6 counterpart, the Maverick M4A1 carbine. Up until the final Steam version of Counter-Strike, the M4A1 was stuck silenced and had an ACOG sight, which could be used by right-clicking, similar to the AUG. Up until 1.6, the FMAS didn't exist, so the AUG and the M4 were the only assault rifles available to the CT side. It makes sense why the scope was removed, as to add some more variety to the weapons and gunplay. The functionality of this item is fairly straightforward. You'd be able to use it to zip from one area to the next. Given the limitations of the Gold Source engine, it probably would have only been usable in special zipline areas like some other items in Counter-Strike. Here's a recreation of what using the zipline would have looked like. Although it would add verticality and thus variety to the maps of Counter-Strike, part of the reason the zipline was cut from the game was because of engine limitations. As the Gold Source engine couldn't render 3D skyboxes, ziplining through a canyon, for example, or a jungle landscape would have looked rather dull. The M60 was an LMG planned for the version of Counter-Strike developed by the now-defunct Rogue Entertainment, which eventually became the Counter-Strike Condition Zero we know today. The M60 would be similar to the already existing M249, but with a higher fire rate. As Gearbox Software took over development, they kept the M60, and the weapon can be seen in trailers and interviews with Gearbox CEO Randy Pitchford. The weapon had changed from being CT exclusive to being available on both sides, in addition to massively increased accuracy while stationary. Sadly though, as Gearbox Software's iteration of Condition Zero never saw the light of day, the M60 was shelved for the final release, although there are still HUD and kill icons in the CS 1.6's game files. Another weapon proposed by Rogue Entertainment for their version of Counter-Strike was the Paintcore Jackhammer shotgun. Available to counter-terrorists and terrorists alike, this new shotgun likely would have been the most expensive and deadliest shotgun in Counter-Strike, with its 12 round per second rate of fire and 10 round magazine. In the words of Bruce Campbell, "Nah, but seriously, this thing would have just been way too overpowered for Counter-Strike's tight-knit, balanced, competitive gameplay, hence why it was cut from the final game. But the gun was actually used in Counter-Strike Online and Counter-Strike Nexon Zombies, MMO spin-offs by the Japanese company Nexon. Those two games could merit a video of their own as well, as there's just so much to talk about. Comment below if you'd like to see a deep dive into these free-to-play MMO versions of Counter-Strike 1.6. In Gearbox Software's version of Counter-Strike Condition Zero, it was planned to add a new melee weapon to the game, the Machete. In this screenshot here, we can see the Machete that was originally meant to appear in Gearbox's Counter-Strike Condition Zero and their build of Counter-Strike. It was to only be available to the terrorist side and was meant to be more powerful than the default knife. As you can see from this cut animation, the Machete was to include a stab attack which could do damage through tactical shields. In Counter-Strike version 1.1, the only grenade available was the flashbang, which interestingly enough could be cooked down before throwing. This feature was later removed. In Counter-Strike Beta 3.0, the flashbang was updated and the name changed to the concussion grenade. Upon being thrown, the grenade would blind players as well as doing a small amount of damage to them. When developing their version of Counter-Strike Condition Zero, Rogue Entertainment came up with the idea for their own concussion grenade, different from the beta concussion. It would have caused the affected players severe tinnitus, and even caused them to drop their weapon if the grenade went off close to them. Although this grenade was cut, the tinnitus effect was added to the flashbang in Counter-Strike Source, and remains that way in all modern Counter-Strike games. Another type of grenade that was planned for Counter-Strike Condition Zero was the flare, which would provide light in certain dark areas. Although we don't know how Rogue Entertainment's version of the flare would have functioned, a Gearbox screenshot clearly indicates that it was to operate like a grenade does, being featured in the grenade section of the buy menu. During Gearbox's development of their version of Counter-Strike, they wanted to add more tactical elements to the game. Thus the Molotov cocktail was born. Although this version of the Molotov was eventually cut, as we all know, it was eventually added back into Counter-Strike Global Offensive as well as the incendiary grenade for the CT side. In CSGO, smoke grenades can extinguish the Molotov cocktail's flames. Similar to CSGO, Gearbox planned to implement an item to counter the Molotov, the gas grenade. The grenade would release a cloud of gas, which would then cause any players not wearing a gas mask to start coughing, revealing their position, and also damage them, completely ignoring armor. Interesting to note, in promotional material, no terrorists are seen wearing gas masks, so this could have meant that the gas mask was only purchasable by the T side. Phew, now that the grenades are out of the way, let's talk about the auto crossbow, a very interesting cut weapon. The weapon was meant to fire poison-tipped bolts, which would cause lasting damage to the affected player and cause them to jerk around, obscuring their view. Overall, this weapon seems just a tad bit too silly to fit into Counter-Strike's realistic military roster, and was eventually cut. Believe it or not, Rogue Entertainment actually planned to add a Landmine or Bouncing Betty into Counter-Strike. We have no official concept art or model of this weapon, but it's pretty easy to guess what it would have looked like based on its real-life counterpart. The mines would have been terrorist exclusive, and when a player stepped on it and heard the click sound, they couldn't move unless they wanted to become red mist. Another player could come by and defuse the mine though using something called a universal tool. This universal tool was to have been an upgraded version of the defuse kit, enabling the player to not only defuse bombs and mines, but also suicide vests, which I mentioned earlier. Landmines themselves actually showed up later on in Counter-Strike Condition Zero deleted scenes, although just being a model with a trigger hurt connected to it. Interestingly enough, Counter-Strike Condition Zero Deleted Scenes also contains a tripwire bomb, although it's just a reskin of the trip mines from Half-Life 1. In early beta versions of the original Counter-Strike, drivable vehicles were actually implemented in several maps and worked like the cart from the Half-Life chapter on a rail, except you could actually control which direction the vehicle was going. Vehicles were cut completely from the Gold Source version of Counter-Strike because they didn't work all that well. Since Gold Source has no physics engine, collision with the vehicles didn't really work. You couldn't really run over players, they'd just phase through the vehicle, and the vehicles would get easily stuck on map geometry and sometimes phase through the map. They were just all around buggy, so it makes sense why they were cut. What is interesting to note though is that the driving mechanics from Half-Life 2 still exist in Counter-Strike Source and CSGO. So maps and game modes were created to allow players to race around a track NASCAR style. Now on to some of the cut and unreleased maps. DE Silo is a bomb defusal map that was featured in Counter-Strike Condition Zero during its development. The map takes place in a Soviet ICBM silo. We have little information on this map, that information being in written form, a low resolution video, and a handful of screenshots. It was designed by Mark Wardwell during Gearbox Software's development of Counter-Strike Condition Zero. The map itself was the first mission in Gearbox's single-player campaign as reported by PC Games in 2002. The Condition Zero Deleted Scenes map Secret War reuses several significant parts of Silo's geometry. The YouTuber ESCalation, who I mentioned earlier, actually decompiled the Condition Zero mission and used parts of the geometry to make a faithful recreation of the map based on the video and screenshots we have. I'll provide a download link for it in the comments if any of you would like to try it out. It's really cool what he was able to do from the limited amount of content we have on the map. Dehakaguy, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, is a bomb defusal map that was featured in Counter-Strike Condition Zero during its development by Gearbox Software. It was developed by Eric Dosher and takes place in a modern city in Japan with lots of retail and outside areas. When development of Condition Zero was handed off to Ritual Entertainment, the multiplayer version of the map was scrapped, and instead some of the textures and geometry were reused in the single-player mission of the same name. ESCalation also remade this map, but the download links in his 2019 video description are dead, so I'll provide you with the re-upload of the map that I found on Game Banana if you'd like to play it for yourself. Now on to the cut factions of Counter-Strike. The Akunin, also referred to in-game as the Yakuza, were a cut terrorist faction from Counter-Strike Condition Zero. During Gearbox Software's development of the game, many new maps were planned to diversify the game's environments, such as maps themed around Japan, Russia, and South America, so it only makes sense to have new Japanese factions to be used on these maps. As a playable faction, the Yakuza only made it into the Xbox version of Counter-Strike. Interestingly enough, the Yakuza were actually planned to make an appearance in CSGO, but were eventually scrapped. The Kitodai were a cut counter-terrorist faction from Counter-Strike Condition Zero which would have served as the counterpart to the Yakuza faction, and were actually brought about when development of Condition Zero was handed over to Ritual Entertainment. There's no custom model for them. The model in the Xbox version of Counter-Strike, as well as Condition Zero Deleted Scenes, is merely a reskinned version of the GSG-9 model. There is, though, this model that was created by Ritual Entertainment, presumably for use in these Japan-themed maps. Sadly, whenever development of Counter-Strike Condition Zero was handed over to Turtle Rock Studios, the Japanese maps and factions were cut from the game entirely. Last but not least, we have the Midwest Militia, one of the most interesting cut factions in my opinion. The Midwest Militia was a cut terrorist faction introduced by Gearbox Software during its development of Counter-Strike Condition Zero. They were meant to be a right-wing extremist group that hailed from the Midwest, basically a bunch of rednecks. The faction itself was inspired by the Ruby Ridge siege of 1992 and the Waco, Texas siege of 1993, in which far-right militias, which some might even call cults, faced off against government special forces. One of the special maps designed for this faction was CS_Trailer Park, which was designed by Chris Audi, the designer of Counter-Strike classics such as Inferno, Aztec, and Vertigo. Here's some footage of me playing a remade version of this map, which I'll link to in the description. Gearbox's iteration of the Midwest Militia were dressed in what you would assume a far-right militia to be dressed in. Hunting clothes, everyday wear like jeans and plaid shirts, and military surplus. One of these player models actually sports a hockey mask. Overall, these player models had a lot of variety with many different clothes and head variants, which was said to be interchangeable. After Ritual Entertainment took over development of the game, they scrapped the Gearbox models and introduced their own ones, which in my humble opinion look nothing like what I would envision for this faction. These models were then used in the final version of Counter-Strike Condition Zero, as well as Condition Zero deleted scenes. Sad to see that the Gearbox versions got scrapped. Maybe someday someone will remake them, or maybe they'll come back in CSGO. One can only dream. And that about wraps up this episode. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like the video as well as check out my links in the description, and feel free to subscribe for more videos like this. I also have a Patreon if any of you are interested in throwing some extra cash my way, which greatly helps me out but is always optional. Don't forget to check out ESCalation's channel, as this video couldn't have been made without his video series The Cut Content of Counter-Strike. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, peace.